All right, everybody, so this is Andrew Jackson and all the crazy stuff that he is known for. So we're going to do this in two videos. So I'll kick off here with suffrage. So we have in 1800, well, the rule is that individual states can determine who gets to vote. Whether you are white, male, land-owning, tax-paying, Christian, whatever the rules are for the individual states, that's the rule. So we have here on our map here in 1800, look at me doing this backwards, 1800, a lot of the states have requirements that say you have to own property and or that you have to be paying taxes to vote. There's only just a couple, it looks like Kentucky and Vermont and New Hampshire are the only ones that say universal white males can vote. If you come to 1830, you see that we have more universal white male suffrage, so it's kind of hard to say universal, but more white male suffrage without the property requirements. And then as we get to 1860, so just a year before the Civil War, we have the majority of the states that are having less and less requirements to vote other than being white and male. The opponents to this say, well, this is not good, because if we allow more and more and more people to vote, well, that means that we're going to have a mob of people voting, and you can't trust the mob. So I guess that's been the argument for the past 250 years, that if you keep allowing more and more people to vote, then the average people, an individual person is smart, but people are stupid. So it's an interesting argument. But things are still keeping on. We still have bribery going on. We still have corruption going on in the governments and the voting systems. Martin Van Buren is going to come out of New York, and he's going to start the first political machine. So a political machine is kind of like we think about in the year 2020, where you have a group of people who their responsibility, their job is to promote the agenda of the Republicans or the Democrats. That's their job. They are right. So he's going to start this idea, Martin Van Buren, and here we go. The election of 1824. So we've got Monroe went for his 8 years and the era of good feelings, and nothing major happened, right? And so now we have, well, other than the panic of 1819, but so here we have four guys that are going to run for president. Now these four guys, there's not a lot of difference with in regard to their beliefs, their party lineup. We're not having the independents versus the Republicans versus the Democrats versus the socialists versus the communists. No, they're all from the same political party, because the Federalists are now all gone, well, except for our Supreme Court guy, John Marshall. They're all gone. So these guys are basically all running on the same political ticket, the political party. And we have, let's see, in the very far right there, we've got John Quincy Adams, the oldest son of John Adams, so John Quincy. John Quincy is going to get a lot of the votes in New England. He's a fantastic lawyer. He was a really good Secretary of State. Well, there you go. You got this next guy, Andrew Jackson. What's he famous for? Well, he likes to beat up on people. He was the hero of New Orleans that was fought after, right? It was fought after the Treaty of Ghent. And then he's the famous Indian fighter. So he's very, very popular in the West. We have Henry Clay here. Henry Clay, the great compromiser, right? The Missouri Compromise. He's going to have some other compromises coming up, but Missouri Compromise guy. So Henry Clay, and he's very anti-Jackson. He doesn't like Jackson at all. And then we got Mr. Crawford here, and Crawford is going to represent the Old South, and so Crawford is he represents the slave owners, right? Okay, so these four guys are going to run for president in 1824. Jackson wins, but wait for it. Actually, maybe I should put a footnote, put a little star, and then go down to the bottom of the page and says, but wait for it, he doesn't become president. Jackson wins the popular vote, and he wins the electoral vote, but he doesn't become president. And I know right now you're sitting here thinking, what? He won the What? He won the popular vote, so he got the most votes. And he got the most electoral votes, which I know in your head you're saying that should make him president. Well, you'd think that, but no. Here's the rule. Turns out you got to have more than 50% of the electoral votes. Well, since there were 4 guys running, even though Jackson got the majority of the vote, he got the plurality of the vote, which means he got the most votes. He didn't get 50%. So the rule says that if you have no one making 50% in the election for the president, what do? You send it to the House of Representatives. And only the top 3 guys, the top 3 vote getters, get to be voted on in the House. Okay, which means Clay, who is number 4, he's out. Although, interestingly enough, Henry Clay is the Speaker of the House, which means he's in charge of the House of Representatives, which is about to vote for the President of the United States. And remember, he doesn't like Jackson. We call this the corrupt bargain. Now, whether it actually happened like this or not, whether there was under-the-table dealings, behind-the-scenes dealings, behind-the-back-door dealings, in the dark room, we have no proof either way. But it does look pretty suspicious. Henry Clay, being Speaker of the House, he's going to make a deal with John Quincy Adams. And he's going to say, John Quincy, if as Speaker of the House, I can get the House to vote for you as president. And ultimately, that's what happens. The House votes for John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams becomes president. But then, interestingly enough, Henry Clay then he is then appointed by the new president as Secretary of State. So he moves from Speaker of the House to Secretary of State. And I know some of you, you're sitting here thinking, wait, is that a move up? Is that a move down? Is that a lateral move? How does that work? I mean, well, in how we have it today, we have the president. If the president is killed, then the vice president takes over. If the vice president is killed, then the Speaker of the House takes over. So Clay's third in line. Why would he drop to Secretary of State? Well, here's the deal. Henry Clay, he listened to his American history teacher, and he found out, or he realized, he's doing the math, and he realized that, hey, if you're Secretary of State, there's a good chance you're going to become president, because look at this. Jefferson was George Washington's Secretary of State. Jefferson became president. Madison was Jefferson's Secretary of State. Madison became president. Monroe was Secretary of State for Madison. Monroe became president. John Quincy Adams was Secretary of State for Monroe. He became president. So all of these people have been Secretaries of State, and then they became president later. So Henry Clay, looking at this, goes, I don't want to be Speaker because no Speaker has ever done this, so I'm going to become Secretary of State. And he becomes Secretary of State, and I've said the word Secretary of State way too many times now. And people look at this, especially all the Jackson supporters, they go, hey, you guys are cheating. You made a deal. You made a deal, and you should not have done that. So we call that the corrupt bargain. Here we have Crawford sewing together Jackson's lips, just for fun. Again, there's no evidence whether that actually happened, that there was a corrupt bargain. You can look at Clay's resume. I mean, he certainly easily had the credentials to be Secretary of State, but it is interesting. All right, so John Quincy Adams, President number 6. Look at that, I did that without looking. Well, just now I did, but John Quincy Adams, President number 6. Again, very lawyer, very scholarly. John Quincy Adams is the only president that I know of that chose not to put his hand on the Bible when he was inaugurated. He chose to put his hand on a law book instead of a Bible. So when he said, I swear to affirm the Constitution of the, he chose a law book. Very popular in the Northeast, very popular in Boston, but elsewise not so much. John Quincy Adams is going to push. Okay, so Henry Clay from the last video, Henry Clay was pushing the American system, the roads and raise the taxes. And John Quincy Adams was part of, he liked that idea, to push for America first kind of stuff. And so he wants to continue with the high tariffs. He wants to continue with building the roads. He wants to increase the military. So these are all ideas John Quincy Adams is going to try to push during his 4 years of presidency. And the Jackson supporters are not going to like this. They're not going to like this. And for that matter, so Jackson's out in the West. So, and then the South is not going to like this, because the South looks at all the tariffs and say, look, the tariffs from, the tariffs that we're putting over there on England and France and etc. as they come over here with the goods, that money basically just goes to the North. And it hurts the South. It hurts the South. And so the South was he wasn't very popular with the South or the West. All right. Anything else on there? Finally, Adams was, I don't want to say he was a fan of the Native Americans, but he believed more so than other presidents that the Native Americans should actually be treated, like people. More on that later. All right, the election of 1828 is now going to be basically Jackson, the war hero, versus John Quincy Adams, the president. And it is going to turn ugly. Ugly. We've got Martin Van Buren, who is really ramping up the political machine in favor of Jackson, and John Quincy Adams, who's he's not very popular, except for like the people in the Northeast. So it's going to get really ugly, and the votes are going to come down, and Jackson is going to crush him. There's a whole bunch of blue in there, and not a lot of dark brown. The electoral vote was 68%. The popular vote was 56%, which is a big slam dunk in presidential elections. Jackson is elected president, and all right. So when he's elected president, one of the things that happens is, of course, after election day, then you have, and actually after inauguration day, then you have the big parties at night, right? And so let's see, was that in 1992? Bill Clinton. President Clinton, he went on the Jay Leno show and played saxophone and just crazy stuff. But anyway, everybody has these big parties. Andrew Jackson opened up the White House and let all the normal people into the White House, and had a huge party. And then various stories tell us that a couple of days later, the servants at the White House started going around and taking inventory, and a whole bunch of stuff was stolen. But it is what it is when you invite the riffraff in. So people call President Jackson King Mob sometimes. We have a different version. Some of his detractors. We have up here. We have Andrew Jackson riding on a donkey, and the story here is that it says, the modern Balaam and his ass, or donkey. The modern Balaam. So Balaam is a Bible character out of the book Numbers, and the short version is that Balaam is riding on his donkey. He was doing something. The Lord told him to say certain things, and Balaam basically went the opposite direction. And Balaam was riding on his donkey down the street, and the donkey froze on him and turned around and started to walk the other way, and Balaam started to beat the donkey. And so then the donkey went down another road, and there were walls between separating the road, and the donkey froze, and then Balaam beat the donkey again. And then the donkey went down another road, and it was very narrow road with walls. And so the donkey couldn't even turn around. At some point, the donkey froze and actually went down on his haunches. And Balaam begins to beat the donkey. And then the donkey turns his head around to Balaam and the donkey says, "Hey, Why are you beating me? And of course, Balaam's like, hey, you're a talking donkey. It turns out this whole time that, hey, welcome to Sunday school. This whole time that the donkey has seen the angel of the Lord, who has been invisible to Balaam. The donkey has seen the angel of the Lord with a flaming sword. You can kind of see that in the picture right there. And the donkey stopped Balaam from being killed by the angel of the Lord. And then the angel showed up and to Balaam and said, hey, that donkey saved your life. You better be paying attention. Don't beat the donkey. And so here we have a political cartoon. See, I'm getting around to it. Here we have a political cartoon where Andrew Jackson is basically on the donkey, and they're saying, hey, Andrew Jackson, open your eyes. You're beating the donkey, which is the people. You're beating the people. You're beating the people of the United States, and you don't see what's going on. You need to follow the donkey. Huh. That was actually very well done by me. Brain kiss. That's like kindergarten. All right, moving on. So what do we know about Andrew Jackson? Oh my goodness! I'm just gonna keep this as neutral as possible. Although if you're from Oklahoma, you absolutely hate Andrew Jackson for various reasons coming up in video 2. What do we know about Andrew Jackson? Well, he was we call him Old Hickory because hickory is very tough wood. It's very hard to break, and so he's Andrew Jackson. Self-made man, grew up from poverty. He was a war hero. We know that. Little education. Some references say he graduated from 8th grade. Some say he graduated from high school, and that's it. We know he was a gambler. We know he was a drinker. We know that he dueled people a lot, even as president. He appeals to the common man. So that was his thing. That the average man said, you know what? I could be him. I could be him. John Quincy Adams went to law school. Well, maybe I can't be him, but I can be Andrew Jackson. Oh, look, he has a violent temper. And Andrew Jackson would take things personally. He'd take things personally. I can't even imagine if he had a Twitter account because he would be blowing it up like... Anyway, so when he becomes president, Andrew Jackson, of course, the Constitution says the president can have a cabinet and that the Senate will approve the cabinet members. If you recall, George Washington said that's fine, but the president has the right to fire the cabinet members. That's coming up shortly. And so Andrew Jackson has his cabinet, and they're made up of big mucky muck guys that Andrew Jackson really could care less about, because what he has is his kitchen cabinet. So he has a group of his friends who sit around in the kitchen, right? Who sit around and they discuss matters. So you've got these guys, Martin Van Buren and the group, and so they are not official members of any cabinet. They're just his friends. But these guys are the ones he goes to for advice. Andrew Jackson, the common man. The spoil system. Thank goodness we got rid of this in the year 2020. I laugh. Andrew Jackson had made an interesting observation. He said, look, there are people in government, as he comes in as president elected in 1828, comes in as president in 1829, early 29, and he says, there are people here who have been in government since since Jefferson, 1800. And if you've been in government for 30 years in the same job, you are probably not, I mean, you could be an outstanding member of society, but most likely you're corrupt. Most likely you've gotten yourself into some deals, some wheeling and dealing that probably you should not have, and you've used your power, being in the government for all this time, illegally. So Jackson says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to kick all these people out. Jackson believed that, because he was one of the common men, Jackson believed that common men could take the jobs of these people. And so he's going to institute, well, he's not the first one, but he's the first one who does it big. He's going to institute the spoil system. If you vote for me, if you contribute to my campaign, then when I become president, or when I become insert title of a leader, then I will help you out. I will give you a job. I will vote for certain legislation. I will, again, thank goodness in the year 2020, we don't have any lobbyists that pay millions of dollars to senators or House members for them to be reelected so that they can then vote for certain legislation. Thank goodness that doesn't happen. So he's going to issue the spoil system, and a lot of Jackson's people are going to come in. Now, the one group that he cannot influence the judiciary members who are already there. Remember, they're there for life. If somebody dies or there's a new position created, then Jackson can put in his people, but he can't kick people out who are in the judiciary. John Marshall's coming. He's coming back. Here we go. Let's see. This cemented the two-party system. You either liked Jackson or you hated Jackson. You either liked him or you hated him. 2020. In 1824, 1824, John Quincy Adams was elected president, and some of Jackson's supporters tried to really screw up John Quincy Adams' presidency by introducing all sorts of weird bills and things like that. Well, one of them was the Tariff of Abominations. I'm sorry, the Tariff of 1824. And then ultimately it's going to get passed in 1828 as Jackson becomes president. The Tariff of Abominations was jacked up the tariffs that we're putting on goods and services from Europe pretty high. And so, yay, good for the New Englanders. They're going to make some money off this. Good for the manufacturers. They're going to make some money off this. But for the people down in the South who are farming cotton, this is bad. So they're going to rename this the Black Tariff, the Tariff of Abominations. And it is going to be awful for Jackson's political career. All right, here we go. John Quincy. This is our first picture of a president, like a real president, a real picture, right? Kodak Eastman, who the first camera. The reason you don't see these people smiling in these pictures, in these early pictures, is because the shutter speed of these cameras is 30 seconds or 45 seconds or even a minute that they have to be exposed that long. And so if you move your pinky, then your pinky will just be a blur. You got to keep your pinky still for like 30 seconds, or otherwise it'll be a blur. So the reason that you see people not smiling is because they figured out pretty quick that you cannot, I'm not saying because you're about to try it, and I know this because I'm telling you can't do it, so you're about to do it. But a lot of people are unable to keep a smile for 30 seconds, the same smile for 30 seconds. Why? Because you don't use your, what muscle? The buccinator muscles. You don't use those too, unless you kiss a lot or you play trumpet. Don't use those a lot, so it's hard to keep the same smile. So people that are smiling in their photographs, and then they drop their cheeks and all that kind of stuff, then it becomes fuzzy in the picture. So if you just keep a neutral face or a frown, because you can hold a frown for a long time apparently. Are some of you still smiling? Because I told you couldn't smile for that long. Anyway, so that's why he's doing that. So, why did okay. So this is John C. Calhoun. I'm just looking at his facial expression. I wonder if he kept his eyes open for that long. Anyway, John C. Calhoun, he's going to be the bad guy in the next couple of slides from Jackson's point of view, and really maybe even from America's point of view. John C. Calhoun is he's from South Carolina. Why does it have to be South Carolina? You're going to get that later. South Carolina, and he's going to have lots of different jobs. He's going to be a vice president under Jackson at one point before he resigns. But John C. Calhoun is very, very anti these tariffs. So he's going to write the South Carolinian Exposition, South Carolina. I'm going to put that as an adjective. The South Carolinian Exposition, also known as the Calhoun Exposition. So it's a essay, and his essay is pretty point blank. Basically, he took Madison, who wrote the Virginia resolution, and Jefferson, who wrote the Kentucky resolution. If you recall from 8 videos ago, that those resolutions basically said, hey, we're not big fans of the Constitution. We think that the states have the ability to, that if a state doesn't agree with the Constitution, the state has the ability to overturn certain aspects of that. And so here we have John C. Calhoun, who's reaffirming this idea, and he says, look, we believe that, the national government should pass legislation that is utilitarian for all states, and if it doesn't have utility for all the states, then it is unconstitutional. And so if there is hypothetically something like a Tariff of Abominations that hurts the South, then that's unconstitutional, and a state that finds it unconstitutional can then just choose not to follow that rule. I wonder what's going to happen. Well, let's see. No, I know what's going to happen. On April 13th of 1830, they had the Jefferson Day dinner. They're still doing this today, I think. But the Jefferson Day dinner. And here we have Andrew Jackson and John C. Calhoun. They're in the same room. And so they're toasting one another. And the story says that they're talking about various things, and Jackson stands up for his toast, and Jackson says, and I want to read this so I get it accurately. Jackson said, quote, "Our federal union, it must be preserved," end quote. Calhoun is said to have said, quote, "The union, next to our liberty, most dear. May we always remember that it can only be preserved by distributing evenly the benefits and burdens of the Union." So Jackson says the Union must be preserved. That's everybody together stays together. The Union stays together. And Calhoun, the Vice President, says the Union is important next to our liberty, which is more important. Now, clearly those two were taking shots at each other, but please note that the next day in South Carolina, they printed the toasts, and somebody tweaked, fake news, they tweaked Andrew Jackson's statement. And it's subtle. It just says, "Our federal union must and shall be preserved." Now, Jackson actually said it must be preserved. Now think this through. It must be preserved. The tweak was it must and shall be preserved. What's the difference? Well, let's see. If you look at the word be, it's a verb, but it's a passive verb. So it must be preserved. That's a passive. So that's like pie in the sky. Yay! In our perfect world, it must be preserved. But if you put the word shall in front of it, now that becomes an active verb. It must be, and shall be, which indicates that there's an active enforcement of the union, right? And I know that's subtle, but it was subtle enough to set people off in South Carolina. Fake news, tricky. Let's see, it says down here, privately, President Jackson wanted to invade South Carolina and hang these people. Well, there you go. All right, so it's going to just get blown up here, and so Calhoun, he's going to go back to South Carolina. He's going to get everybody riled up, and he and the South Carolinians, they're going to pass the Ordinance of Nullification of 1832, and so the Ordinance of Nullification basically says we are not going to follow the Tariff of Abominations of 28, or the Tariff of 32, which was slightly less egregious than the Tariff of 28. And so we're not following that. And you can't, and it continues, we are not going to follow it, and you can't make us follow it. And if you attempt to make us follow it, we're leaving. We will secede from the Union. South Carolina. Why does it always got to be South Carolina? You'll get that in a little bit. I said that before. If you try to force us to do this tariff, we are leaving the Union. Henry Clay, the great compromiser, Henry Clay, Missouri Compromise, remember, Henry Clay, the corrupt bargain, Henry Clay from Kentucky, he's going to say, hey, I got a plan, I got an idea, let's do this, a new rule, new compromise, let's write a new compromise of 1833, the Tariff of 1833, and what we're going to do is we're going to take the Tariff of 1832, and even though we know it's high, we're going to then drop that over a period of 9 years. We're going to drop it incrementally through each year down to the levels that it was in 1816, and then everybody goes back to normal, status quo. And South Carolina agreed to this, albeit reluctantly. Also in 1833, President Jackson got his Congress to pass the Force Bill, also known by the South Carolinians as the Bloody Bill. So the Force Bill basically says, hey, I know nobody's actually going to nullify or attempt to secede from the Union, but in case somebody does, a state decides to do something like that, the president's going to be given power to bring the army down and handle that. So it was the Force Bill. La la la. Interestingly enough, the nation was pro-Jackson and anti-Calhoun at that point. All right, last slide for this video. Before we get to the crazy stuff, because it's not even crazy yet. This is a little crazy. All right. Young Peggy O'Neill. She was 17, I believe. Peggy O'Neill is going to get married to a Mr. Timberlake, John Timberlake. He's going to be a soldier, and the soldier. So she now becomes Mrs. Timberlake. Bye bye bye. Okay, so she becomes Mrs. Timberlake, and they're in debt. Mr. Timberlake, the soldier's in debt. Well, Mr. Eaton says, hey, I can help you with your debt, and he helps pay off the Timberlake's debt. Mr. Eaton becomes Secretary of War under Jackson. There's some speculation that Peggy, the wife of Mr. Timberlake, and Mr. Eaton perhaps were close, that they hung out some, which it is what that is, right? And then the Secretary of War sent her husband, Mr. Timberlake, off to battle, where he's going to die from pneumonia. Well, when he dies, 9 months later, just 9 months later, Peggy marries Mr. Eaton, John Eaton. So now she is Peggy Eaton. She married within 9 months of her husband's death. Okay, so here we go. There's a group of wives, obviously. You've got the Vice President's wife, you've got the Secretary of State's wife, you've got the Secretary of War's wife, you've got the Secretary of Treasury's wife, all these wives. Notice I didn't say the First Lady. The First Lady actually doesn't exist. She died. Andrew Jackson, his second wife, he was elected president. She died before he put his hand on the Bible to become president. So he's actually a bachelor at this point. More on that in a second. So there's a group of ladies, the first ladies out there, the big group, the petticoats. And so these ladies, they're going to have an episode of Mean Girls, and they're going to start doing all this gossip behind Peggy's back. They're going to start pointing out that, hey, 9 months suggests that maybe you and this guy were hooking up besides, and your husband, and maybe it was your idea to kill your husband, and all that crazy stuff. So the Eatons Secretary of War and his wife Peggy were not invited to the parties. The other mean wives didn't come over to their house. It was just this crazy junior high kind of a thing. And I can speak intelligently about junior high gossip because I taught at the middle school for forever. So, right. So this is what's going on. Jackson finds out about this, and Jackson comes down on the Eaton side. And so there's some speculation about that, in that the mean girls were really harassing Peggy. Well, Jackson's wife, when she was alive, she was harassed quite a bit as well. There was some rumors out there that perhaps Jackson's first wife and Jackson's second wife perhaps were married to Jackson at the same time. There might have been some overlap there. Somewhere in the middle there might have been some overlap, and so there's a lot of rumors going on about Jackson's second wife, and so so she had a lot of stress put on her, and Jackson says that that's probably why she died, simply from the stress and all the stuff coming at her, that she died, and he became a widower. So he totally understood, or he thought he understood, that Peggy was going through all this as well, and so he landed on her side. So at some point, Jackson basically asked for the resignation of all the guys in the group. So the Secretary of Treasury left, he resigned, Secretary of War resigned, Secretary of State resigned, the Vice President resigned, right. And so the only person who did not resign was the Postmaster General, because he's in charge of the mail and he doesn't really care. So the Peggy Eaton affair. Did it have anything to do with Jackson? Well, Peggy and Andrew, not so much, but the idea that because of this group of the mean wives caused him to fire everybody, and that obviously made sensational national news. All right. So this is the first video of Jackson. We have the Peggy Eaton affair, the Petticoat affair. We have nullification crisis. We have the Jefferson dinner. We've got South Carolina exposition. We've got the Tariff of Abominations. We've got the spoil system. We've got the rule of King Mob. Right. All right. So Jackson. But we haven't even got to the fun part yet. And we'll do that in video 2. Hang on, I'll be right back. Be good.